When we think of the Wild West, the first image that comes to mind is always the same: a fearless cowboy riding his horse with a revolver on his waist and a steady gaze. A man who solves everything quickly, who sleeps under the stars without fear of anything, who enters a saloon and commands respect just by his presence. A free, courageous, almost invincible guy. This is the character Hollywood has sold us for decades, and we bought it. But what about the common man? The one who wasn't a gunfighter, nor a sheriff, nor a gold mine owner? The one who simply tried to live, eat, work, and not die before he was 40? This one, the films forgot to show. Because the truth is that the life of an ordinary man in the Wild West was anything but glamorous. It was a daily fight against hunger, fatigue, illness, and loneliness. And today, we're going to tell you what that fight was like. The first thing you need to understand is that the Wild West was not a place for the weak. There was no comfort. There was no ease. An ordinary man woke up before the sun rose, because the workday started early and ended late. There was no alarm clock, no breakfast ready on the table. The body was the clock. When the daylight hit your face, it was time to get up. And getting up meant facing the cold. Many regions of the American West had brutal winters. Temperatures that dropped below zero, biting winds, snow that covered everything. The houses, when they existed, were precarious wooden constructions, with gaps in the walls, through which the wind entered without asking permission. Many men slept in collective huts, sharing space with strangers on improvised beds made of straw. The smell was strong. Hygiene was a luxury that almost no one could afford. Taking a shower was rare. There was no running water, no shower. To wash, you had to get water from a river or, well, heat it over a fire and hope that the water was not contaminated. Many men went weeks, sometimes months, without a full shower. The most they did was wash their faces and hands. The rest of the body was up to luck. And it wasn't considered strange. It was simply life as it was. The clothes followed the same logic. An average man had one, maybe two changes of clothes. He wore the same shirt, the same pants, the same boots for weeks at a time. Sweat accumulated, the fabric hardened, the smell became unbearable. But changing clothes meant spending money, and money was the scarcest thing there was. So the man continued like that, stinking, dirty, with irritated skin, with wounds that wouldn't heal due to lack of cleaning. Lice were constant companions. Almost everyone had it. Fleas, too. Sleeping without itching was a privilege few knew about. Now, let's talk about food. Because if you think that the cowboy in the movies ate well, sitting at a table full of roast beef and steaming beans, forget it. The diet of a common man in the Old West was repetitive, bland, and often insufficient. The basics of the diet were beans, bacon, hard biscuits, and coffee. That's right. Day after day, meal after meal. The biscuits, called hardtack, were so hard that they had to be dipped in coffee to soften. Otherwise, I could break a tooth. The bacon was salted to preserve it, as there was no refrigerator, and the coffee was so strong it was like hot mud. But that's what he had. Fresh meat was a privilege. When a man managed to hunt a rabbit, a deer, or even a snake, it was a celebration. But hunting took time and energy, things an average worker didn't always have to spare. Fruits and vegetables were even rarer. Most men suffered from nutritional deficiencies without even knowing what that was. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was more common than any gunshot. And cooking was no easy task. No stove, no decent pans. Everything was done over an open fire, in an improvised bonfire. The food was often raw on the inside and burnt on the outside. And if it rained, there was no fire, no hot food. An ordinary man in the Old West learned quickly that starvation was part of the routine, and when the food spoiled, it was not thrown away. Strange-smelling meat was seasoned with pepper to disguise the taste. Beans with animals were cooked anyway. Wasting food was a greater sin than any other on this earth. The body learned to accept what it received, and the stomach got used to what would make us rush to the hospital today. Work. That was the word that defined the life of any man in the West. Heavy, manual work, without breaks, and with no guarantee of anything. The miners were perhaps those who suffered most. They spent hours inside dark mines, breathing toxic dust, carrying heavy stones, always at risk of a collapse. Many died buried. Others developed lung diseases that slowly killed them over the years. And what's worse, most never found enough gold to justify so much suffering. The gold rush was more promise than reality. The cowboys, who we romanticize so much in films, had an equally hard life. Driving cattle for hundreds of kilometers, under the scorching sun or torrential rain, sleeping on the ground, eating as little as possible, always being alert not to lose a cattle or be attacked by bandits. A cattle drive journey could last months. Months without a bath, without a bed, without a roof, and the payout in the end was miserable. An average cowboy earned something like $1 a day. It was barely possible to survive. And when they arrived at their destination, after months on the road, what did they do? They spent it all in one night. They would go straight to the nearest saloon, drink until they dropped, gamble what they had, and the next day they were as poor as before. The cycle repeated itself. Work, suffering, miserable pay, all spent in one night, and back to the beginning. This was the real life of the cowboy that we admire in the movies. Railroad workers were not far behind. Build trails in hostile terrain, in unbearable heat with rudimentary tools. Accidents were frequent, explosions, falls, serious injuries that were not adequately treated. A man who got hurt in a project like that was simply left aside. There was no hospital, there was no compensation, there was nothing. Either you worked or you died. Sometimes both things at the same time. Speaking of dying, disease was by far the common man's greatest enemy in the Old West, much more than bullets or bandits. Without basic sanitation, the water people drank was often contaminated. Rivers where animals drank, where trash was dumped, where bodies were sometimes thrown. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid spread easily and killed quickly. A man could be fine in the morning and dead at night. Tuberculosis was another death sentence. Called consumption at the time, it slowly consumed the body. The man was getting thinner, weaker, coughing blood, and knew the end was near. There was no cure. The most that was recommended was fresh air and rest, things that a manual worker could not afford to have. And when someone got sick or injured, the options were few. Real doctors were very rare in the West. What existed were charlatans, guys who called themselves doctors and sold miracle medicines that didn't cure anything. Tonics based on alcohol, opium, and unknown substances. Often the medicine was worse than the disease. If a man broke a leg, the most common solution was amputation. No adequate anesthesia, no sterilization. The patient bit a piece of leather, took a sip of whiskey, and hoped to survive. Many did not survive, not because of the fracture, but because of the infection that followed. Loneliness was another burden that the common man carried. The West was immense, empty, silent. Many men lived in isolation for weeks or months, working in remote lands, in mining camps far from any town. There was no telephone. There was no regular mail in most places. A letter could take months to reach its destination, and often it didn't even arrive. A man who left his family behind to seek his fortune in the West knew he might never see his family again. Some sent money when they could. Others simply disappeared, swallowed by the immensity of the territory. In the camps, coexistence was difficult. Exhausted, frustrated men, many addicted to alcohol or gambling. Fights were constant, not for reasons of honor like in the movies, but for banal things. A gambling debt, a crooked look, a piece of food. The violence of the Old West was not cinematic. It was raw, fast, and nonsensical. Alcohol was a refuge for many. The whiskey in the saloons was cheap and strong. Men drank to forget their tiredness, their longing, their pain. But alcohol took its toll. Addiction, fights, accidents, stupid decisions. Many men who survived disease and hard work ended up destroyed by drink. The game was another trap. In saloons, poker tables were open day and night. A man who received his weekly pay could lose it all in a single night, and lost. The temptation was too great. Life was too hard, and the illusion of making easy money was irresistible. Many were in debt to dangerous people, and gambling debts in the Wild West couldn't be resolved in court. It was resolved with a bullet or a knife. And even with all this, with all the hardship and suffering, men continued to go west. Why? Because the East didn't offer anything better for many of them. Immigrants who arrived from Europe without a penny in their pockets. Former slaves who had freedom but no land, no work, no opportunity. Broke men who owed more than they could pay. Orphans who grew up without anyone. For all of them, the West represented something that needed no other place offered. The chance to start over. It didn't matter who you were, where you came from, what you had done. In the West, you could be anything. I could work hard and buy a piece of land. I could open a small business. I could try my luck in the mines. The West did not guarantee success, but it guaranteed possibility. And for those who had nothing, the possibility was everything. Many went alone. They took what little they had, put it in a cart or on their back, and set off towards the unknown. They didn't know what they were going to find. They didn't know if they would survive the trip. But they knew that to stay still was to die little by little. The West at least offered the illusion of movement, of progress, that tomorrow could be different from today. And this illusion, however fragile it was the fuel that kept these men standing. Of course, most didn't get rich. The majority remained poor, tired, sick. But there was something in the air of that place, a sense of freedom that didn't exist in the crowded cities of the East. There was no boss shouting all the time. There were no strict rules dictating how to live. It was every man for himself, for better or for worse. There was also the issue of age. A man in the Wild West aged quickly. The hard work, the poor diet, the lack of medical care, all of this took its toll early. A 40-year-old man in the West looked 60. The body was worn out, the hands were calloused, the skin was sunburned, the teeth were rotten or missing. Reaching 50 was already considered a feat. Many were no more than 30. And when the body could no longer handle the work, what was left? There was no retirement, there was no assistance. An old man in the West was a forgotten man. Some were taken in by communities, others simply died alone in abandoned huts. The cemeteries of the Old West tell this story better than any book. Tombstones with ages that shock us. Men in their early 20s dead from illness, 18 boys killed in work accidents, children who never even grew up. Death was next door in the Old West, and everyone knew it. And knowing this changed the way men lived. There was no long-term planning. Nobody thought about saving money for old age because most didn't expect to get there. We lived the day. You spent what you had. He drank when he could. Laugh when you can, because tomorrow was a word that had no guarantee in that place. But even in the face of all this, there were moments of joy. There was music in the saloons, laughter around a campfire, stories told under a starry sky like few of us have ever seen. There were friendships forged through suffering that lasted a lifetime. There was the pride of building something from scratch, of looking at a piece of land and knowing it was yours. There was also religion, which for many was the only comfort. When a city grew large enough, one of the first things it built was a church. It didn't matter the denomination. What mattered was having a place where men could stop, breathe, and believe that it all had some purpose. Itinerant preachers traveled from town to town, bringing the word to camps and villages. And even the toughest men, the ones who spent the whole week swearing and drinking, sat on the wooden benches on Sunday and were silent. The common man of the Old West was not a movie hero. He didn't wear a white hat. He didn't walk with a pose. He didn't have ready lines. He was an ordinary guy, scared, hungry, homesick. But he was also a guy who didn't give up easily, who got up every day knowing that the day would be hard and still got up. The next time you watch a Western and see the cowboy galloping free through the desert with the epic soundtrack playing in the background, remember one thing. The true hero of the Old West wasn't the fastest gunslinger or the bravest sheriff. He was the common man. He who woke up before the sun, worked until his body hurt, ate what he had, and slept wherever he could. The one who faced all of this and still kept trying. This one deserved a movie. And now I ask you, if you lived back then, with nothing like what you have today, no cell phone, no internet, no comfort at all, would you be able to handle a day in the Wild West?